Hey everyone, welcome back. Carl Jung exposed 6 people you should never trust. What if I told you that one of history's most brilliant psychologists spent decades studying the human psyche, only to discover that there are 6 specific types of people you should never, ever trust? Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, the man who gave us concepts like introversion, extroversion, and the collective unconscious, wasn't just studying personality types for fun. He was mapping the dark territories of the human mind, identifying the psychological patterns that spell danger for anyone who gets too close. In today's video, we're going deep into Jung's most controversial observations about human nature. We're talking about the 6 psychological archetypes that Jung believed were walking red flags, people who, according to his research and clinical experience, will inevitably betray your trust, manipulate your emotions, and leave you questioning your own reality. But here's the thing. Jung didn't just identify these people to scare you. He gave us the tools to recognize them, understand them, and most importantly, protect ourselves from them. So if you've ever felt like you're constantly being taken advantage of, if you've wondered why certain people seem to drain your energy, or if you want to develop that 6th sense for spotting toxic individuals before they wreck your life, this video is for you. I'm going to share real stories, practical examples, and Jung's exact methods for identifying these 6 dangerous personality types. But first, hit that like button if you're ready to unlock some serious psychological wisdom, and don't forget to subscribe, because we're diving deep into the human psyche on this channel. Section 1, the shadow projector. Let's start with Jung's most feared personality type, the shadow projector. Jung spent years studying what he called the shadow. Basically, all the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge or accept. Now, most of us have a shadow, and that's normal. But shadow projectors? They've completely disowned their shadow and instead project it onto everyone else. They literally cannot see their own flaws. But they're experts at spotting those same flaws in other people. Here's how you spot them. They're the people who are constantly criticizing others for behaviors they themselves exhibit. The person who calls everyone else selfish, while never considering anyone's needs but their own. The colleague who accuses everyone of being dishonest, while they're the one bending the truth. Jung observed this in his clinical practice repeatedly. He had patients who would come in complaining about how manipulative their spouse was, how controlling their boss was, how unreliable their friends were. But when Jung dug deeper, he discovered that these patients were often describing their own unconscious behaviors. Let me tell you about Sarah, not her real name, but a perfect example of a shadow projector. Sarah was convinced her entire office was plotting against her. She'd spend hours telling anyone who'd listen about how jealous and backstabbing her coworkers were. But here's what Jung would have noticed immediately. Sarah was the one spreading rumors. Sarah was the one undermining others' work. And Sarah was the one manipulating situations to make herself look better. The dangerous thing about shadow projectors is that they're often very convincing. They genuinely believe what they're saying because they've completely disconnected from their own shadow. They'll make you question your own perceptions and gaslight you into thinking you're the problem. Jung's warning was clear. Never trust someone who can only see faults in others, but never in themselves. These people are psychologically incapable of taking responsibility for their actions, which means they'll always find a way to make you the villain in their story. But here's Jung's brilliant insight. You can use this to your advantage. When someone constantly projects their flaws onto others, they're actually telling you exactly what their own problems are. Listen carefully to what they accuse others of, and you'll know exactly what to watch out for with them. Section 2, the persona addict. The second type Jung warned about is what I call the persona addict. Jung defined the persona as the mask we wear in social situations. Basically, the version of ourselves we present to the world. Now, having a persona is normal and healthy. We all adjust our behavior depending on whether we're at work, at home, or out with friends. But persona addicts have taken this to a dangerous extreme. They've become so identified with their mask that they've completely lost touch with who they really are underneath. These are the people who seem too good to be true, because they usually are. They're the ones with perfect social media profiles, always saying the right thing, always looking flawless. But Jung knew that when someone is this invested in their image, there's usually something very dark hiding underneath. The telltale signs? They're obsessed with how others perceive them. They can't handle any criticism, even constructive feedback. They're constantly name-dropping, showing off, or trying to impress people. And most importantly, they seem to have no authentic emotions or genuine vulnerabilities. Jung treated many patients like this, and he discovered something terrifying. When someone lives entirely through their persona, they become capable of incredible deception, because they've lost the ability to be genuine even with themselves. Let me share the story of Marcus, a successful businessman who seemed to have it all. Charming, wealthy, always perfectly dressed, always had the right connections. He was the guy everyone wanted to be around, but Jung would have seen right through him. Marcus was so addicted to maintaining his perfect image that he was embezzling money from his company to fund his lifestyle. He was cheating on his wife while posting loving anniversary messages on social media. He was lying to his friends, his family, and ultimately himself, all to maintain this perfect persona. The dangerous thing about persona addicts is that they're master manipulators without even realizing it. They've spent so much time crafting their image that they know exactly how to present themselves to get what they want from different people. Jung's insight here is crucial. When someone's entire identity is built on external validation and image management, they have no internal compass for right and wrong. They'll do whatever it takes to maintain their persona, even if it means destroying the people closest to them. Here's how to spot them. Pay attention to whether someone's actions match their words over time. Persona addicts are consistent in their image but inconsistent in their behavior. They'll tell you what you want to hear, but their actions will tell a completely different story. And watch for this red flag. They never share genuine struggles or admit to real mistakes. Everyone has problems, everyone makes mistakes. If someone's life seems too perfect, Jung would say you're looking at a persona, not a person. Section 3. The inflation victim. The third type Jung identified is perhaps the most dangerous of all, the inflation victim. Jung used the term inflation to describe what happens when someone's ego becomes so enlarged that they lose touch with reality and begin to believe they're more important, more capable, or more special than they actually are. Now, this isn't just about having a big ego. Jung observed that psychological inflation actually makes people dangerous because they start to believe their own hype so completely that they lose the ability to see consequences or consider other people's needs. These are the people who always have to be the smartest person in the room, who can't handle being wrong about anything, who genuinely believe rules don't apply to them. They're not just arrogant. They're psychologically inflated to the point where they've lost touch with reality. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly in his work, and he noticed that inflated individuals are particularly dangerous because they combine grandiosity with a complete lack of empathy. They literally cannot see other people as real, complex human beings with their own needs and feelings. Let me tell you about David, a perfect example of what Jung called psychological inflation. David was a manager at a tech company who genuinely believed he was a visionary genius. He would take credit for his team's work, ignore expert advice, and make decisions that affected hundreds of people without consulting anyone. But here's the scary part. David wasn't consciously trying to be malicious. He was so psychologically inflated that he genuinely believed he was the only person capable of making good decisions. In his mind, other people's opinions literally didn't matter because he was operating on a higher level than everyone else. The result? David's team had the highest turnover in the company. Projects failed because he wouldn't listen to feedback. And when things went wrong, David would blame everyone else because in his inflated reality, he couldn't possibly be at fault. Jung's warning about inflated individuals is this: they will use you, manipulate you, and discard you without any conscience. because they don't actually see you as a real person. You're just a character in their personal narrative where they're the hero. Here's how to identify them. They interrupt constantly. They can't celebrate other people's successes. They always have to one-up everyone's stories. And they become genuinely angry when challenged or corrected. Most importantly, they never apologize sincerely. They might say sorry to get what they want, but they never actually believe they were wrong. Jung also noticed that inflated people are often incredibly charming initially because they're so confident and sure of themselves. But pay attention to how they treat people who can't do anything for them: waiters, janitors, subordinates. Inflated individuals show their true nature in these interactions. Section 4, the anima-animus possessor. The fourth type Jung warned about involves one of his most complex concepts, the anima and animus. For men, the anima represents the feminine aspects of their psyche. For women, the animus represents the masculine aspects. When these are healthy and integrated, they contribute to psychological wholeness. But Jung discovered something disturbing. Some people become possessed by their anima or animus, meaning these unconscious aspects take over their personality in destructive ways. When this happens, they become emotionally volatile, manipulative, and deeply untrustworthy. In men, anima possession often looks like sudden mood swings, emotional manipulation, passive-aggressive behavior, and an inability to deal with conflict directly. They'll use emotions as weapons, playing victim one minute and becoming cruel the next. In women, animus possession typically manifests as harsh criticism, intellectual arrogance, and an obsession with being right. They become argumentative, dominating, and use logic as a weapon to control others. Jung treated many patients who were possessed by their anima or animus, and he found that these individuals were particularly dangerous in relationships because they would use their partner's emotions against them. Let me share the story of Jennifer, a classic case of animus possession. Jennifer was brilliant and successful, but she was also completely unable to have a healthy relationship. She would intellectualize every emotion, turn every disagreement into a debate she had to win, and use her intelligence to make her partners feel stupid and inferior. Jennifer wasn't consciously trying to be cruel. She was possessed by her animus. The masculine aspect of her psyche had taken over to such an extent that she couldn't access her own emotional authenticity or empathy. Every interaction became about proving her intellectual superiority. On the flip side, consider Michael, a case of anima possession. Michael seemed sensitive and emotionally aware, but he was actually using emotions to manipulate everyone around him. He'd have dramatic mood swings, play the victim when he didn't get his way, and use guilt and emotional manipulation to control his family and friends. The dangerous thing about anima-animus possession is that it often looks like emotional intelligence or intellectual strength. But Jung knew better. These people are actually emotionally immature and intellectually dishonest. Here's how to spot them. In anima-possessed men, watch for emotional manipulation, victim playing, and passive-aggressive behavior. They'll never confront you directly, but will make you feel guilty for things that aren't your fault. In animus-possessed women, look for intellectual bullying, an inability to be wrong, and a tendency to turn every emotional situation into a logical argument. They'll use their intelligence to make you feel small and stupid. Jung's key insight. When someone is possessed by their anima or animus, they're not operating from their authentic self. They're being controlled by unconscious forces, which makes them unpredictable and potentially dangerous in relationships. Section 5. The Mother-Father Complex Carrier. The fifth type Jung identified as untrustworthy is someone carrying an unresolved mother or father complex. Now, we all have complexes. They're just emotionally charged clusters of ideas in our unconscious. But when someone has a severe parental complex that they haven't worked through, Jung found they become dangerous to trust. People with mother complexes are either completely dependent on maternal figures or completely rejecting of them. They're looking for someone to take care of them, or they're so afraid of being controlled that they sabotage any nurturing relationship. Father complex carriers are similar but focused on authority and power. They either desperately seek approval from authority figures, or they're in constant rebellion against any form of structure or leadership. Jung observed that these complexes make people fundamentally unreliable because they're not responding to you as an individual. They're responding to you as a projection of their unresolved parental issues. Let me tell you about Lisa, who carried a severe mother complex. Lisa was in her 40s, but she was still completely dependent on her mother for emotional support, financial help, and major life decisions. Any friend or romantic partner was automatically seen as either a threat to this relationship or a replacement mother figure. Lisa would become incredibly clingy with new friends, expecting them to take care of her emotional needs the way her mother did. When they couldn't or wouldn't, she'd become hostile and accusatory, claiming they were abandoning her just like everyone else. The problem wasn't that Lisa was a bad person. It was that she was psychologically stuck in childhood. She couldn't form adult relationships because she was still operating from this unresolved complex. Then there's Robert, who carried a severe father complex. Robert was successful in his career, but he was constantly in conflict with bosses, authority figures, and anyone who tried to give him direction. He couldn't separate appropriate professional boundaries from his childhood. Issues with his controlling father. Robert would sabotage relationships with mentors, reject helpful feedback, and create unnecessary conflicts, all because his father complex made him see authority as inherently threatening. Jung's insight here is crucial. When someone is operating from an unresolved parental complex, they're not really in relationship with you. They're in relationship with their projection of their parent onto you. Here's how to identify them. They have extreme reactions to nurturing or authority that seem disproportionate to the situation. They either desperately seek parental approval, or they're constantly rebelling against any form of guidance. They also tend to have very black and white thinking about relationships. People are either all good or all bad, either perfect caregivers or total threats. There's no middle ground because they're seeing everyone through the lens of their unresolved childhood trauma. Jung warned that these people will inevitably disappoint you because they're not capable of adult reciprocity. They're either looking for a parent figure to take care of them, or they're so defended against being controlled that they can't accept love or support when it's offered. Section 6, the collective unconscious identifier. The final type Jung warned about is perhaps the most subtle and dangerous, the collective unconscious identifier. Jung discovered that we all share certain universal patterns and symbols in what he called the collective unconscious. But some people become so identified with these archetypal patterns that they lose their individual identity completely. These are people who completely lose themselves in group identities, ideologies, or movements. They're not thinking as individuals anymore. They're thinking as representatives of whatever group they've identified with. The dangerous thing about collective unconscious identifiers is that they're capable of betraying personal relationships in service of their group identity. They'll sacrifice friends, family, and personal values to maintain their position in the collective. Jung saw this pattern throughout history. People who become so identified with their religion, their political party, their profession, or their cause that they lose the ability to think critically or maintain personal relationships that don't serve the group. Let me tell you about Amanda, who became completely identified with a particular political movement. Amanda was a thoughtful, intelligent person. But once she joined this group, she lost the ability to think independently about complex issues. Amanda would cut off friendships with people who didn't share her political views. She'd attack family members who questioned her beliefs, and she'd justify increasingly extreme behaviors because they served the cause. She wasn't Amanda anymore. She was a representative of the collective. The scary part? Amanda genuinely believed she was becoming a better person. She thought she was serving a higher purpose. But Jung would have recognized that she'd lost her individual soul to the collective unconscious. Here's another example. Tom, who became so identified with his professional identity as a lawyer that he lost the ability to relate to people outside of that framework. Every relationship became about power dynamics. Every conversation became an argument to win, and every situation became a case to solve. Tom wasn't consciously trying to be difficult. He'd become so identified with the lawyer archetype that he couldn't access other aspects of his personality. He was no longer Tom the individual. He was Tom the embodiment of the legal profession. Jung's warning about these people is this: they're fundamentally unreliable because their loyalty is to the collective, not to you as an individual. When push comes to shove, they'll choose the group over personal relationships every time. Here's how to spot them. They can't discuss their beliefs or identity without becoming defensive or aggressive. They use group language constantly, or we think, people like us. Anyone who really understands? They can't seem to have personal opinions that differ from their group's positions. Most importantly, they judge people primarily based on whether they're part of the in-group or the out-group. If you're not one of them, you're automatically suspect. So there you have it, Carl Jung's 6 types of people you should never trust. The shadow projector who can't see their own faults. The persona addict who's lost touch with their authentic self. The inflation victim who's become dangerously grandiose. The animus possessor who's emotionally manipulative. The mother-father complex carrier who's stuck in childhood patterns. And the collective unconscious identifier who's lost their individual identity. But here's the thing. Jung understood better than anyone, recognizing these patterns isn't about judging people or writing them off as hopeless. It's about protecting yourself and understanding the psychological forces that drive human behavior. Jung believed that awareness was the first step toward psychological health. By understanding these patterns, you can spot them early, set appropriate boundaries, and avoid the heartbreak and manipulation that comes from trusting people who aren't psychologically capable of healthy relationships. Remember, Jung wasn't trying to make you paranoid or suspicious. He was trying to make you psychologically literate. Understanding these patterns helps you recognize when someone is operating from an unconscious place that makes them dangerous to trust. The good news? Jung also gave us the tools to work on these patterns in ourselves. Shadow work, persona integration, complex resolution. These aren't just concepts. They're practical methods for becoming more psychologically healthy and trustworthy ourselves. If this video opened your eyes to some patterns you've experienced or maybe even recognized in yourself, that's exactly what Jung would have wanted. Consciousness is the beginning of healing. What do you think? Have you encountered any of these 6 types in your own life? Drop a comment below and share your experiences. And if you want to dive deeper into Jungian, psychology and practical tools for psychological growth, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching. And remember, in a world full of psychological complexity, awareness is your best protection.